What do you see then as the primary attraction of the identity synthesis for achieving this outcome? Because obviously it's quite powerful, since I guess, if you'll permit me to speak in the loose Dawkinsian language of memes, and I don't necessarily mean what I'm about to say in a disparaging way, but the synthesis has really infected a great deal of minds. So how did it spread so far and so fast and so quickly? And this all comes before we discuss what might be wrong with it.
Yeah. Well, I have an account of how it spread. And then you're asking perhaps a slightly different question about why it's so attractive. So let me try and sort of answer both of those points. I mean, what I've described so far is the first part of the book about the intellectual roots of the identity synthesis. And in a way, what you're asking about now is sort of the next part of the book, which is about, okay, so by about 2010, a lot of these ideas become super influential in universities, but they're pretty marginal in society as a whole. Kimberly Crenshaw publishes a really fascinating paper on the 30th anniversary of critical race theory around 2010, in which she says, look, we've become super influential in universities, we have a big research program, we've been more successful than we could have imagined, but the rest of America is completely ignoring us. And Barack Obama is the worst because he really doesn't believe our ideas at all, right? And in fact, he is making it way harder for our ideas to gain any kind of traction. And so we really don't have much hope that our ideas might become influential in mainstream society. And 10 years later, that has profoundly changed, and people deeply influenced by the identity synthesis, like Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi, are on the top of bestseller lists at that point. So what happens in those 10 years? Well, I think three things happen. One is the rise of social media, which really tempts people into defining by particular identity characteristics, often in novel ways. I think part of the interesting thing here is that, if you're in a high school in the 90s or in the early 2000s, to have a viable identity, you have to have a minimum number of people in your high school who share that identity, and that limits the options. Once you have Tumblr with its self-tagging mechanisms, you can create quite boutique identity, and as long as you find 50 people somewhere out there in the world who share that, you can sort of create your own subculture and really start to identify by that. And then you need a sort of overarching ideology that holds these different tribes together, and that becomes sort of the popularized, memified version of the identity synthesis that starts to emerge first on Tumblr and then on Ford Catalog and everydayfeminism.com and other kind of fora in the early 2010s. And then in the next step, there's a profound technological change in how content spreads. So when Vox.com is founded in 2013, most of the hits to the website still come directly from the website. So most of the article reads still come from people going to Vox.com and looking at what's there and saying, this looks interesting, I'm going to click on it. And that means that the content you have on the site needs to be pretty broadly appealing, right? Like if you keep coming there, 9 out of 10 articles never look interesting, you're not going to come back. But by about 2015, 2016, this shifts, and suddenly most of the content spreads via social media, Facebook, Twitter, and a few other platforms at the time. And so then the thing that spreads most is stuff that is really directly about you. It's an article about Indian Americans, an article about a particular sexual identity group, a particular cultural identity group, about people who are strongly united in something like veganism. And that then spreads through these social networks and social media that often are organized around the same lines. And so suddenly these kinds of publications can publish stuff where like 9 out of 10 of the articles are not particularly interesting to most of their readers, but each of these articles, 1 out of 10 is super interesting to you, and you're going to share it to a lot of other people who share your identity group, and that's how it's going to spread. And so that really privileges that kind of form of media, and quickly then transforms, what the Washington Post and the New York Times and MSNBC and all kinds of other people publish and talk about. So that's one kind of mechanism. The other mechanism I'm calling the short march through the institutions, which is simply that by 2010, there's a lot of students, especially elite students from Ivy League universities and so on, who are deeply steeped in the identity synthesis because it becomes so dominant on campus. So, if they're in certain kinds of majors, they're deeply steeped in these ideas. And even if they're not, they have distribution requirements, and they have administrators who have become to who have come to sort of proselytize these ideas in all kinds of trainings and so on as part of campus culture. And these students go into the workforce and they end up having an outsized impact in contexts where there's a lot of young employees, there's a lot of competition for the most talented young employees, and the institutions have a kind of self-understanding as doing good for the world, which makes it hard to resist progressive political demands. And so in the worlds of nonprofit, of tech, of certain professional kind of firms like consulting, these ideas become particularly powerful and then spread from there. And then the third step is the election of Donald Trump. There's a really interesting literature on social psychology which shows that in-group critics have a lot of credibility. That if my group is doing something wrong, and I've been a member of a group for a while, and people know that, and I frame my critique as I care about this group, but I worry that we're going off the rails here, as in a way I hope I'm doing for the left more broadly. Actually, often groups are quite open to that. They will listen to that a lot of the time. But that ceases to be the case under conditions of threat. If you have a feeling that there's an outside enemy, then you suddenly treat these internal critics really poorly, and you treat them worse even than external enemies because you think you might be a traitor. And so as Donald Trump gets elected in 2016, poses a genuine threat to democratic institutions, to minority groups, the left sort of rallies around the wagon and says anybody who criticizes any kind of left-wing idea is a traitor, is secretly on the side of Donald Trump. And that's when these ideas really conquer a lot of mainstream institutions.